Avellini's grey leaf washed from her wrist just as the Alpha King stepped through the herb house door. 18 years earlier, her mother had taught her the ritual before Avellini was old enough to understand why it mattered. Grind 7 grey leaf leaves until their bitter oil surfaced. Stir them into cold water. Press the mixture behind each ear, along the throat, and over both wrists. Never miss a morning. Never let an alpha smell you. Avellini had obeyed so faithfully that the ritual had become as ordinary as breathing. At 18, she could prepare grey leaf in darkness, judging the mixture by texture beneath her fingertips and the sharp herbal bitterness in the air. She never questioned why her mother's warning had sounded less like advice and more like terror. Questions were dangerous when the answers might change the only life she knew. So every morning before entering the royal herb house, Avellini erased herself. Not her face. People noticed that easily enough. Her long golden brown hair and gentle features sometimes earned a second glance, even beneath the plain sage green dress she wore while sorting roots and medicinal leaves. What disappeared was the part every wolf expected to find. Her scent. To other wolves, Avellini was almost nothing. Empty Omega, 2 young servants called her when they thought she could not hear. Another once wondered aloud what kind of alpha would ever choose an Omega he could barely scent. Avellini had lowered her eyes and continued tying bundles of dried lavender. Their laughter hurt, but hurt was survivable. Attention might not be. She had learned that distinction early. Being unwanted gave her something other Omegas rarely possessed inside a royal court filled with ambitious alphas, invisibility. And Avellini treasured it. Especially this week. The palace had been transformed for the royal choosing ceremony, when noblewomen from powerful packs would arrive hoping to become Luna to Alpha King Valdemar. Even servants whispered his name differently. Valdemar was not merely an alpha. He was the Alpha King, a ruler whose presence could silence a council chamber before he spoke. Avellini had never stood close enough to see him, and she intended to keep it that way. The moment she learned he would inspect the palace preparations personally, she submitted a request to work below stairs in the kitchens until the ceremony ended. She would carry flour sacks, scrub pots, peel vegetables, anything that kept stone walls and several locked doors between herself and the most powerful alpha in the kingdom. Her transfer had not yet been approved that morning. So she stood at the long oak work table, separating grey leaf from harmless sage, counting the hours until she could leave. Then heavy footsteps sounded beyond the corridor. Conversations died. Someone whispered, "The king." Avellini's fingers stopped. Her heartbeat struck hard against her ribs. He was not supposed to inspect the herb house. She reached instinctively for the small grey leaf vial hidden inside her sleeve, checking the familiar bitterness at her wrists. Still there. She was safe. The doors opened. Guards entered first. Then Valdemar. Avellini saw black royal armor catching the candlelight, polished metal marked by the fine scratches of use, a heavy fur mantle across broad shoulders, and a crimson cloak flowing behind him. Long black hair framed a face sharper and more striking than the distant portraits had ever captured. A king's sword rested at his side. Everyone bowed. Avellini bowed deepest. "Do not look at him. Do not move. Do not give him any reason to remember you." Valdemar began speaking with the master herbalist, his voice low and controlled. Avellini quietly reached for a wooden tray and turned toward the washing table. If she could reach the rear storeroom unnoticed, she could remain there until he left. Her sleeve caught the rim of a basin. Water tipped across the table. Cold liquid spilled over her hand and ran beneath her cuff. Avellini froze. The water streamed directly across her right wrist, carrying a pale gray stain with it. Greyleaf. Her protection. Gone from one small patch of skin. Behind her, Alpha King Valdemar stopped speaking. Valdemar turned toward Avellini before the last trace of Greyleaf disappeared into the water. For one impossible second, the herb house seemed to narrow around him. He had spent years surrounded by wolves whose scents revealed fear, ambition, loyalty, jealousy, and desire before their mouths ever did. He had attended ceremonies where noble women wore expensive perfumes meant to complement their natural scent. He had stood before every eligible bloodline the royal council considered worthy of the crown. None had ever caused his wolf to rise inside him with such sudden, wordless recognition. This scent did. It was faint, almost already gone, but something in it reached beneath discipline and rank and touched an instinct Valdemar had stopped believing existed. Then it vanished. "Your Majesty?" the master herbalist asked. Valdemar did not answer immediately. His gaze traveled across the room until it found the young woman beside the overturned basin. Avellini kept her head bowed. Cold water dripped from her fingers onto the stone floor. She could feel the exposed patch of her wrist as though it were burning beneath his attention. She slipped her wet hand into her sleeve. "Too late." "You," Valdemar said. Every servant became still. Avellini forced herself to look up. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made the warning from her childhood return in her mother's frightened voice. "Never let an alpha smell you." "What is your name?" he asked. "Avellini, Your Majesty." Her voice remained soft, but steady. "Avellini what?" "Only Avellini." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. That frightened her more because she did not understand it. "Come closer." Her instincts begged her to retreat, yet refusing the king before an entire room would draw more attention than obedience. She crossed the few feet separating them and stopped at a respectful distance. Valdemar studied her. Golden brown hair had slipped loose near her cheek. Her plain sage dress identified her as neither noble nor important. Nothing about her explained what his wolf had just sensed. Then he noticed the bitter herbal smell rising from her wet sleeve. "Greyleaf. Hold out your hand." Avellini's pulse stumbled. "Your Majesty." "Your hand." Slowly, she offered her left hand. The protected one. Valdemar did not touch her. He merely watched, then drew a quiet breath. Nothing. No trace of the scent that had stopped him moments earlier. Avellini saw confusion harden into suspicion. "Were you working with anything unusual?" he asked. "Only the herbs assigned to me." It was technically true. Valdemar glanced toward the basin, but Avellini had already moved the stained cloth over the diluted greyleaf. "I see." He stepped away. Relief nearly weakened her knees. He had not found her. Not truly. She lowered her head again and waited until his footsteps moved toward the opposite end of the room. Only then did she breathe. Valdemar finished the inspection without another question, but the strange scent remained in his memory long after he left the herb house. By evening, he stood in his private study with Captain Torin across from him. "I want the royal scent registry searched," Valdemar said. Torin frowned slightly. "For whom?" "I do not know." "What am I looking for?" Valdemar stared toward the darkened window, remembering the instant his wolf had awakened. An unmated woman whose scent should not be possible to forget. Torin understood that the king was not asking out of ordinary curiosity. He bowed once. I will begin tonight. In the servants' quarters, Avalini sat on the edge of her narrow bed and rubbed fresh grey leaf across her right wrist until the bitter scent filled the room. She applied a second layer, then stopped herself from adding a third. Her hands were trembling. For 18 years, the secret had belonged only to her, Runa, and the memory of her mother. Now the Alpha King had almost touched its edge. Avalini whispered the old warning to herself as if repetition could make it stronger. Never let an alpha smell you. Across the palace, Torin entered the royal scent office carrying the king's sealed order. Odessa looked up from behind her desk and read the authorization without changing expression. 18 years of careful silence stood between her and the name she feared might surface. She returned the document to Torin with perfectly steady fingers. Of course. Every registry will be made available to you. Torin turned to leave. Odessa waited until his hand reached the door before speaking again. Captain. He looked back. Her voice remained calm. What exactly did His Majesty smell? Odessa's question followed Torin into the corridor, but he gave her no answer. By sunrise, the Royal Scent Office had begun examining generations of records, and Avalini had already decided she could not risk another mistake. She doubled the grey leaf in her morning mixture. The paste was darker than usual and bitter enough to sting her skin, but fear made caution feel like a luxury. Yesterday, the Alpha King had noticed her. Today, royal officials were inspecting every servant assigned to the palace before the choosing ceremony. Avalini understood the connection even if no one had spoken it aloud. Valdemar was searching for the scent that had disappeared. She covered her wrists, throat, and the skin behind her ears twice, then joined the line outside the examination chamber. One servant after another stepped forward while an examiner recorded scent classification and compared it with the royal registry. When Avalini's turn came, Odessa herself was standing beside the table. Avalini had seen the woman only from a distance before. Odessa's silver-threaded robes marked her authority, but it was the stillness in her expression that unsettled Avalini. Name? The examiner asked. Avalini. Family line? None recorded. The examiner checked the page. Omega classification. Extremely weak scent. Avalini kept her eyes lowered. Odessa moved closer. Look at me. Avalini obeyed. For several seconds, Odessa studied her face with an attention that felt strangely personal. Then she leaned just close enough to test the air around Avalini. Greyleaf held. Nothing escaped. Pass, Odessa said. Avalini walked away without allowing herself to hurry. Only after she reached the herb house did relief finally loosen the pressure in her chest. She had survived. She had protected the secret again. Then the room tilted. A bundle of rosemary slipped from her fingers. Avalini reached for the work table, but her hand missed the edge. When awareness returned, she was lying on a narrow bench with Runa pressing a cool cloth against her forehead. How much did you use? The older herbalist demanded quietly. Avalini tried to sit up. Enough. That is not an answer. Twice the usual amount. Runa's face lost color. Avalini, greyleaf is safe in small quantities. You cannot keep increasing it whenever you are frightened. Footsteps sounded near the doorway. Runa immediately fell silent. Valdemar stood there. He had come to question the master herbalist about yesterday's inspection. Instead, he had heard enough. His gaze moved from Avellini's pale face to the faint gray residue along her wrist. Understanding came slowly, and it changed something in his expression. "Leave us," he told the attendants. Avellini stiffened. Runa hesitated, but the king added, "She is not under arrest." When they were alone except for Runa at the far end of the room, Valdemar remained several feet away. Greyleaf suppresses scent. It was not a question. Avellini said nothing. "You used enough to make yourself ill." Still she remained silent. Why? Her mother's warning rose inside her. "Never let an alpha smell you." Avellini curled her fingers into the blanket. "I have done nothing against the crown." "I did not say you had." That answer unsettled her. Valdemar could have demanded obedience. Instead, he watched her as if her fear mattered more than the secret itself. Captain Torin entered moments later carrying a small herb reference volume. "Your Majesty," I confirmed it. "Greyleaf cannot create or imitate another wolf's scent. It only suppresses what is already there." Valdemar's eyes returned to Avellini. The suspicion remained, but it had changed shape. If she wanted to manipulate him, poisoning herself into invisibility made no sense. The council requested permission to question her, Torin continued. Avellini's breathing stopped. Valdemar noticed. "Denied." Torin glanced at him. "They will object. Then they may object to me." He looked at Avellini. "Until I understand what is happening, no one questions her without my permission. She is under the protection of the crown." Avellini stared at him. Protection was not what her mother had taught her to expect from an alpha who noticed her. Valdemar turned and left without touching her or demanding another answer. That frightened certainty she had carried for 18 years developed its first crack. By evening, Avellini had left the palace grounds and followed the narrow road to Runa's cottage. She placed the Greyleaf vial on the wooden table between them. "No more half-truths," she said. Runa looked at the vial, then at the young woman she had helped raise. Avellini's voice trembled, but she did not look away. "Why was my mother afraid of the palace?" Runa's silence frightened Avellini more than any answer could have. The older woman sat across from her at the small wooden table, both hands wrapped around a cup she had forgotten to drink from. For most of Avellini's life, Runa had been the person who made frightening things simple. A fever required willow bark. A difficult winter required careful stores. Loneliness required patience. But now she looked toward the shuttered window as though 18 years had suddenly returned to stand outside it. "Your mother was not afraid of every alpha," Runa finally said. Avellini felt something inside her tighten. "Then why did she tell me never to let one smell me?" "Because she needed a child to remember a warning before that child was old enough to understand it." "That is not an answer." "No," Runa's eyes softened. "It is the reason I allowed you to believe the wrong one." The admission hurt more than Avellini expected. She pushed the Greyleaf vial across the table. "I have covered myself with this every morning because I believed there was something dangerous about me." "There is nothing wrong with you." Avellini stared at her. "Then what was my mother protecting me from?" Runa took a long breath. "The royal court." The words seemed too small for the weight they carried. Avellini had expected some frightening truth about her scent, perhaps some forgotten sickness or inherited defect. Instead, Runa had named the very institution that now surrounded her. Why? I do not know everything. Your mother made certain of that. She believed the fewer people who knew, the safer you would be. And you accepted that? I accepted a promise to keep you alive and unnoticed. Runa rose and crossed to an old cabinet. From behind folded linens, she removed a small wooden box Avelini had seen throughout childhood but had never been permitted to open. Inside lay several ordinary keepsakes, a faded ribbon, a pressed flower, a small scrap of parchment, and a broken piece of dark red sealing wax. Runa placed the box before her. These belong to your mother. Avelini picked up the wax. Part of a crest remained pressed into its surface, too incomplete for her to recognize. What is this? She carried it the night she brought you to me. Where had she come from? Runa hesitated. The capital. Avelini's fingers closed around the seal. Another piece of her childhood shifted beneath her feet. Her mother had not simply hidden in a remote village because she feared alpha attention. She had fled the center of royal power with an infant and evidence she had considered important enough to preserve. Was I born here? Avelini asked. Runa looked away. That was answer enough. Avelini stood. Hurt burned through the fear now. You watched people call me empty. You watched me believe no one could ever want me, and you said nothing. Because being unwanted kept you safe. The words stopped her. They were cruel only because Avelini understood them. She had believed the same thing herself. Runa reached for her hand. Your mother loved you enough to make herself misunderstood. I loved you enough to keep her promise. Perhaps we were wrong. But neither of us wanted you ashamed. Avelini looked down at the broken seal. For 18 years, hiding had been something done without thought. Now continuing to hide would be a decision. Where would records from my birth be kept? Runa's face tightened. Avelini. I am not asking you to protect me from the answer anymore. The following morning, Avelini returned to the herb house and searched its old delivery registers. She found nothing under her name, but one ledger from 18 years earlier contained several pages referencing transfers to a secondary royal archive. After sunset, she entered that archive with the broken seal concealed in her sleeve. She found rows of birth records, medical registries, and scent classifications, but before she could locate the year she needed, footsteps approached. Avelini closed the ledger and slipped away through the adjoining storeroom. She never saw the clerk who entered minutes later and noticed the disturbed dust on the shelf. By noon the next day, that information reached Odessa. The royal scent mistress stood alone in her office, listening as the clerk described which archive had been searched. A girl who merely feared discovery would have run. A girl searching old records was different. Odessa dismissed the clerk and remained motionless until the door closed. Then she made a decision. Concealment had protected the secret for 18 years. Concealment would no longer be enough. Before Avelini could make the court question its records, Odessa would make the court question Avelini. That afternoon, an official notice circulated through the palace warning that an unidentified Omega might be using illegal scent manipulation near the king. By evening, guards arrived at the herb house carrying a royal summons. Every servant watched as the parchment was placed into Avelini's hands. Her name appeared beneath the seal of the council. For 18 years she had survived by being beneath notice. Now the royal court was demanding that she stand before it as a suspect. Avelini entered the council chamber carrying the same secret that had kept her alive for 18 years. The summons felt heavy in her hand, though it was only parchment. Noble representatives filled the curved rows beneath the royal dais, and Odessa stood among them with the composed expression of someone protecting the kingdom from a threat. Valdemar sat above them in black armor and a crimson cloak, but the moment Avellini entered, his attention settled entirely on her. She stopped at the center of the chamber. Avellini, a council elder said, "You have been identified as a possible user of prohibited scent manipulation within the royal palace." Murmurs spread through the room. Avellini forced herself not to touch the gray leaf hidden beneath her sleeve. "I have manipulated no one's scent." "Then you will have no objection to a moonwater examination." Her stomach tightened. Moonwater would strip away every trace of gray leaf within minutes. Odessa watched her carefully. "The examination can be performed here," the elder continued, "before witnesses." Avellini looked toward Valdemar. She hated herself for doing it. She did not want to become another frightened Omega waiting for an Alpha to decide what happened to her. Yet he had already heard enough to understand what the council was demanding. Valdemar rose. The chamber quieted immediately. "There will be no examination." Odessa's expression barely changed. "Your Majesty, the council is attempting to protect you. By forcing a servant to expose something she has spent her life concealing? If she has nothing to hide, there is nothing to fear." Avellini felt those words like a door closing. Then Valdemar descended from the dais. He did not approach her. He stopped several feet away, preserving the same distance he had kept in the herb house. "She is clearly hiding something," he said. Avellini's breath caught. Several council members exchanged satisfied looks. Valdemar continued. "But fear is not proof of guilt." Silence returned. "Your Majesty," Odessa said carefully, "her presence coincides with an unexplained scent reaction that caused you to order a search of the royal registry." Avellini turned toward him. So that was why the palace had been searching records. He had not forgotten the moment beside the basin. "Exactly," Valdemar said. "And Captain Torin has confirmed that gray leaf suppresses scent. It cannot manufacture one." Torin stepped forward. "The herbal records are clear. Gray leaf can conceal an existing scent, but it cannot create false mate resonance or imitate another wolf." Avellini saw the accusation change shape around her. The council could still distrust her, but its simplest explanation no longer worked. Odessa shifted tactics. "Then perhaps we should ask why an 18-year-old Omega has spent her entire life concealing what she is." Avellini wished she knew. She had fragments now, her mother fleeing the capital, Runa's promise, the broken royal seal. But fragments were not truth. "I do not know," she said. A few people laughed softly. Valdemar did not. "You expect this council to believe that?" Odessa asked. "I expect nothing from this council," Avellini replied, surprising herself. "I am telling you what I know." Valdemar studied her face. He could smell the gray leaf even from where he stood, sharp and bitter, layered deliberately over whatever had awakened his wolf. He understood something then. Avellini was not guarding a weapon. She was guarding herself. "The investigation remains under my authority," he announced. "Avellini stays under crown protection. No examination will be performed without her consent. The noble Pax will question this decision," an elder warned. "Then they may question it." Valdemar's voice remained calm. "They will not question her freedom to refuse." Avellini stared at him. Her mother's warning had shaped every instinct she possessed. An alpha who discovered her scent was supposed to mean danger. Yet the most powerful alpha in the kingdom had just been given an opportunity to uncover her secret by force, and he had refused it. The council dismissed her with visible reluctance. Valdemar paid the political price immediately. Before sunset, 3 noble delegations demanded explanations, and rumors spread that an unknown Omega had somehow influenced the king. Avellini heard them from the servants. Instead of relief, guilt settled over her. Valdemar was protecting a secret even she could not explain. That night, she stood alone in the herb house with the grey-leaf vial in her palm. Hiding had always been survival. But trust, she realized, could also be a choice. When Valdemar arrived after receiving her request for a private meeting, Avellini was waiting beside a basin of clean water. She closed the door behind him. Her hands trembled, but she did not reach for the grey leaf. "You said no one would force me." "No one will." "Then I want this to be my decision." Valdemar became completely still. Avellini placed the grey-leaf vial on the table between them. "I will show you what I have been hiding," she whispered. "But only you." Avellini dipped the cloth into clean water, knowing the next few moments could undo 18 years of hiding. Valdemar remained near the closed door, exactly where he had stopped when she asked him to enter. He did not approach the basin. He did not command her to continue. That distance gave Avellini enough courage to raise the wet cloth to her wrist. Grey-leaf dissolved beneath slow circles of her fingers, staining the water faintly gray. She washed the other wrist, then her throat, then behind her ears. Each movement felt wrong. Her mother had taught her to cover those places before Avellini understood what scent meant. Removing the protection felt like breaking a promise to someone who could no longer explain why she had demanded it. "You can stop," Valdemar said quietly. Avellini looked at him. "Would you?" "If you asked me to." That was not what she meant, but somehow it answered the question she needed answered. She returned the cloth to the basin. The last bitterness of grey leaf faded from her skin. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Avellini's natural scent began to emerge. It was subtle at first, freed gradually after years of suppression, but Valdemar felt the change before he fully registered it. His shoulders went rigid. His wolf surged awake with a certainty so complete that every unanswered year suddenly seemed to collapse into a single word. "Mate." Valdemar gripped the back of a wooden chair, not because he intended to move toward her, but because every instinct inside him demanded that he understand what stood only a few feet away. This was the scent from the herb house. The impossible trace that had vanished from his senses. The thing he had searched for without knowing its name. Avellini watched recognition transform his face, and terror replaced the fragile trust that had brought her there. She stepped backward. Valdemar saw it immediately. Not surprise. Not embarrassment. Terror. She looked at him as though recognition itself were dangerous. His wolf pressed against his restraint, but Valdemar stepped back instead. Avellini stared at the widening space between them. "What am I?" she whispered. He could have answered with the word burning through every instinct he possessed. Instead, he asked, "Did your mother know?" Avellini swallowed. "She knew enough to make me hide." "For 18 years?" She nodded. Valdemar's expression darkened, not toward her, but toward the unanswered past surrounding them. No mother taught a child to erase herself every morning without believing something terrible would happen if she failed. "Avellini." His voice softened. Your scent is not dangerous. Her eyes filled with confusion. Then why are you looking at me like that? Silence stretched between them. There was no gentle way to change the shape of her entire life. Because my wolf recognizes you. Avellini stopped breathing. Valdemar forced the words out without moving closer. As my mate. The room seemed to disappear around her. Every insult she had accepted, every morning spent covering her skin, every warning she had obeyed returned at once. She had believed hiding kept random alphas away. She had never imagined she had been hidden from one specific alpha. From him. No, she whispered. I am not asking you to accept anything tonight. But the bond means, it means my wolf knows you. His gaze remained steady. It does not mean I own you. Avellini looked down at her uncovered wrist. Her scent was now filling the room she had spent years working inside without ever truly being present in it. She expected Valdemar to come closer. He did not. That restraint hurt in a different way, because it made one question impossible to avoid. If he was not the danger her mother had feared, then who was? Valdemar seemed to reach the same conclusion. Who taught you to be afraid of being found? Avellini slowly raised her eyes. My mother. Then we find out what frightened her. He summoned Torin privately before midnight. Only 3 facts were shared. The scent from the herb house belonged to Avellini, Greyleaf had concealed it, and no one outside that room was to learn what Valdemar's wolf had recognized. Torin placed the broken piece of sealing wax beneath a lamp and studied the surviving crest. I have seen this mark before, he said. Where? Old Royal Scent Office records. It has not been used in years. Valdemar ordered him to trace it quietly. Then he made a second decision. The choosing ceremony would be suspended. By morning, that decision had reached every noble delegation in the palace. The king offered no explanation. Political agreements built around his expected marriage immediately began to tremble. Inside the royal scent office, Odessa received the notice and understood what it meant before anyone spoke Avellini's name. Valdemar had stopped searching. He had found what he was looking for. Concealment was no longer possible. Odessa closed the notice, summoned a council messenger, and gave a single instruction. Call the full royal court. The full royal court was waiting when Avellini entered, and this time no one looked through her. Every noble representative, council elder, and royal official seemed to know enough to stare but not enough to understand. Avellini could feel their attention following her plain sage-green dress across the polished floor. For 18 years, being unnoticed had protected her. Now there was nowhere left to disappear. Valdemar stood beside the throne in black armor, his crimson cloak falling behind him. His expression changed almost imperceptibly when he saw her, but he did not reveal what had happened between them the night before. Odessa stepped into the center of the chamber. The council has discovered information that can no longer remain private. Avellini felt her stomach tighten. For 18 years, this Omega has deliberately suppressed her natural scent. Shock moved through the court. A noblewoman whispered something to the man beside her. Another representative looked directly at Valdemar. Odessa continued. She concealed herself from scent registries, examinations, and every alpha who might have identified what she truly was. Then, days before the royal choosing ceremony, an unexplained scent caused His Majesty to suspend proceedings that affect alliances throughout the kingdom. The meaning was carefully constructed. Avellini heard it immediately. Odessa was not accusing her of merely hiding. She was turning 18 years of fear into 18 years of preparation. You are suggesting she planned this as an infant? Valdemar asked coldly. Odessa faced him. I am suggesting we cannot know what was planned until she explains herself. All eyes returned to Avellini. She wished desperately for the bitter smell of Greyleaf. Not because she needed it now. Because it had always given her somewhere to hide. Did you suppress your scent? An elder asked. Avellini could lie. Valdemar already knew the truth, and perhaps his authority could protect the lie. But that would leave Odessa controlling what the truth meant. Avellini lifted her chin. Yes. The chamber erupted into murmurs. I hid my scent. Odessa's expression remained calm, but satisfaction briefly touched her eyes. Then you admit deception. I admit hiding. Avellini's voice shook once before steadying. Those are not the same thing. Silence spread outward from her. Odessa approached by one measured step. Why would an innocent Omega hide what nature gave her for 18 years? Because my mother taught me to. Conveniently, a woman who cannot answer questions. Avellini felt the old instinct to lower her eyes. This time she resisted it. My mother fled the capital with me when I was an infant. She ordered me never to let an alpha smell me. I believed she feared alphas. I recently learned she feared this court. That changed the room. Valdemar's gaze sharpened. Odessa's composure did not break, but Avellini saw something colder enter it. And what evidence supports this story? Odessa asked. Avellini reached into her sleeve and removed the broken piece of sealing wax. This belonged to my mother. Torin recognized the remaining crest immediately. Royal Scent Office. Several heads turned toward Odessa. She recovered at once. Thousands of documents have passed through that office. A broken seal proves nothing. Then open the records, Avellini said. Odessa went still. Avellini continued before fear could silence her. Open the original birth and scent registries from 18 years ago. Find my name. Find out whether I existed in your records before someone decided I should disappear from them. One elder frowned. Those archives were reorganized years ago. Some records were destroyed. Then verify that too. Odessa looked toward the council. The girl is attempting to turn her own deception into an accusation against institutions she does not understand. Avellini felt every eye upon her, but something inside her had changed. Yesterday she had allowed Valdemar to discover her scent. Today she would allow the entire court to see her fear without letting that fear decide for her. I do not understand your institution, she said. I understand my life. Every morning since childhood, I covered my skin because someone taught my mother that being found would endanger me. If I am guilty of hiding, then tell me why I had to hide. Valdemar descended from beside the throne. For one terrible moment, Avellini thought he might publicly announce the mate bond. Instead, he stopped several feet away. He would not turn her into his possession simply to silence her accusers. Open the records, he ordered. Odessa's voice remained controlled. Your Majesty, the primary ledger from that year no longer exists. Torin looked again at the broken wax in Avellini's hand. His expression changed. He took the fragment carefully, turning the incomplete crest toward the light. The primary ledger may not. Odessa looked at him. Captain? This seal was used on duplicate transfer records before the Scent Office changed its archive system. He looked toward Valdemar. There may be another ledger. Where? Valdemar asked. Torin hesitated because the answer meant crossing council protocol. The sealed lower archive. An elder immediately objected. Those records require council authorization. Torin looked at Avellini, then at Odessa, then finally at his king. For years, obedience had meant respecting the systems he served. Now that same obedience could prevent the truth from being found. He made his choice. Then I will accept responsibility for entering without it. Before anyone could stop him, Torin turned and walked from the royal court. Odessa watched the doors close behind him, and for the first time since Avellini had met her, the royal scent mistress looked afraid. Torin returned carrying a ledger that had been sealed for 18 years, and Odessa stopped pretending to be calm. Dust clung to the dark leather cover as he crossed the royal court, while every conversation died around him. He placed the book on the council table beside the broken piece of sealing wax. The faded crest stamped into the ledger matched the surviving impression in Avellini's hand. The duplicate transfer registry, Torin said. It was never destroyed. Odessa stepped forward. A document that old must be authenticated before anyone draws conclusions. Then authenticate it, Valdemar said. No anger sharpened his voice. He did not need it. Odessa looked at the king and understood that refusing would condemn her faster than whatever waited inside the book. A senior records keeper examined the binding, numbered pages, archive marks, and seals. Minutes passed with painful slowness. Avellini stood perfectly still. She had imagined finding answers, but she had never imagined an entire court waiting beside her while they emerged. Finally, the keeper nodded. The registry is genuine. Torin opened it to the year of Avellini's birth. They searched by date because her family name had never appeared in the modern registry. Then his finger stopped. Here. Avellini moved closer. Her own name stared back at her in faded ink. Avellini. Female. Omega. Birth classification recorded. For a moment, nothing else mattered. She had existed in the records. She had not been born invisible. Her eyes moved lower. Beside the original scent classification was an additional notation written in formal royal script. Torin read it aloud. Unusually strong compatibility response with the royal alpha bloodline. Future royal mate resonance indicated. Restricted verification required. The chamber became utterly silent. Avellini looked toward Valdemar. He had gone motionless. The truth he had discovered privately was older than either of them had understood. His wolf had not suddenly chosen her in the herb house. Something had been recognized when they were children, long before either had been given a choice about what followed. Torin turned the page. There is an amendment. The second entry declared the infant scentless, invalidated the earlier classification, and ordered the original registration removed from active royal mate records. At the bottom sat an authorization seal. Odessa's. Avellini stared at it until the letters blurred. 18 years of Greyleaf. 18 years of believing something inside her had to be erased. 18 years of accepting whispers that she was empty because being unwanted seemed safer than being known. All of it traced back to ink on a page. Why? Valdemar asked. Odessa did not answer. Why was her record altered? His voice remained controlled, which somehow made the question heavier. Odessa looked around the chamber she had served for decades. Because the crown cannot be governed by instinct. Murmurs rose. She continued before anyone interrupted. The council had spent generations maintaining alliances between packs. Then an infant from no recognized noble bloodline produced a resonance connected to the future king. If that record remained, every marriage negotiation surrounding the crown would eventually become meaningless. Avellini could barely understand what she was hearing. So you erased me? Odessa faced her. I protected stability. You made my mother run. Odessa's silence confirmed what her words did not. Avellini touched the broken seal still resting beside the ledger. Suddenly she understood what her mother had carried away from the capital. Not proof that Avellini was dangerous. Proof that someone powerful wanted her hidden. Her mother's warning returned one final time. Never let an alpha smell you. For 18 years, Avellini had heard fear in those words and assumed the fear belonged to her scent. Now their meaning changed. Her mother had not been teaching her shame. She had been buying her daughter time. Avellini closed her eyes. Grief came first, quiet and deep. Then something unexpected followed it. Relief. There had never been anything wrong with her. Valdemar looked down at the registry and understood his own past differently as well. Every failed introduction, every noble match that had left his wolf indifferent, every year he had slowly accepted that perhaps the Alpha King simply had no true mate had rested upon a manufactured absence. Fate had not forgotten him. A human decision had hidden the answer. How many other records were altered? Avellini asked. Odessa looked at her sharply. Valdemar did too. It was not the question anyone expected. Avellini looked around the court. If one child could be erased because her existence was politically inconvenient, how many others were told that the registry defined their worth? No one answered. I do not want revenge, Avellini said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber. I want every altered record investigated. I want no Omega told she is legitimate or illegitimate because a council finds her inconvenient. And I want the authority that allowed this to happen changed. Valdemar stepped beside the council table. It will be. Odessa was relieved of her authority pending royal judgment, and the entire Scent office was placed under independent review. Yet Avellini barely watched as the officials escorted Odessa from the chamber. Her attention remained on her own name in the old ledger. She touched the faded entry once, gently, as if reaching across 18 years toward the mother who had protected her without living long enough to explain why. When Avellini finally turned around, Valdemar had descended from the royal dais. The entire court waited for the Alpha King to claim the true mate stolen from him 18 years ago. Instead, Valdemar stopped several feet in front of her, leaving the space between them untouched. Valdemar stood before his true mate with an entire kingdom watching, and for the first time, destiny was not enough. The silence inside the royal court stretched until Avellini could hear her own breathing. Everyone knew what the old ledger meant now. She was the Omega whose existence had been erased. She was the mate the Alpha King had been prevented from finding. By every tradition the court understood, this was the moment Valdemar should claim what fate had returned to him. Instead, he remained several feet away. Avellini, he said, and there was no command in her name. The record proves what my wolf recognized. It proves what was taken from both of us. His gaze moved briefly toward the open ledger. But it does not decide what happens next. Confusion stirred among the nobles. One elder rose. Your Majesty, if the mate bond has been authenticated, then the question of the Luna is settled. No, Valdemar's answer silenced him. The king looked back at Avellini. The question belongs to her. Something tightened painfully in Avellini's throat. For 18 years, other people had made decisions around her existence. Odessa had decided she was politically inconvenient. Her mother had decided secrecy was the only way to keep her safe. Runa had decided silence was kinder than truth. Even when those choices had been made from love, fear, or duty, Avellini had lived inside decisions she never made. Now the most powerful man in the kingdom could have invoked fate itself, yet he was giving the choice back. The mate bond proves what she is to my wolf, Valdemar said to the court. It does not decide what she must be to me. No one interrupted him. Avellini will not become Luna because tradition demands it. She will not remain in this palace because the crown requires it. She may leave today if that is what she wants, and no person in this kingdom will stop her. Avellini looked at him, remembering the first time he had ordered her to hold out her hand. Even then, he had not touched her. When she collapsed from too much grayleaf, he had protected her before he trusted her. When the council demanded her scent, he had defended her right to refuse. When her true scent finally filled the herb house, every instinct inside him had recognized her, and still he had stepped backward because she was afraid. Only now did Avellini understand that those moments had been answers long before she knew the question. In the days that followed, the royal scent office was placed under formal review. Altered registries were reopened, and the council lost its unilateral authority to determine the legitimacy of mate records. Odessa faced judgment through the laws she had once used to protect her power. Valdemar kept his promise. He never asked Avellini for an answer while the court was still deciding what she ought to choose. A week later, Avellini returned alone to the herb house before sunrise. Everything looked almost unchanged. Bundles of sage hung from wooden beams. Lavender dried beside the windows. On the work table sat the small gray-leaf file she had used for years. She picked it up and remembered the child who had learned to erase herself before she understood what she was hiding. She remembered being called empty and secretly feeling grateful for it. She remembered her mother's warning. Never let an alpha smell you. Avellini no longer heard shame in those words. She heard a frightened mother buying her daughter another morning, then another, until someday the girl might become old enough to choose for herself. Thank you, Avellini whispered. She poured the gray leaf away. Later that morning, she entered the royal court wearing the same simple sage green dress she had worn when people barely noticed her. She had refused the jeweled gowns offered by palace attendants. If she made this choice, she would make it as herself. Valdemar waited beside the throne in black armor and crimson, but he did not descend toward her. He waited. Avellini crossed the chamber with her natural scent uncovered. No bitter herbs. No lowered head. No attempt to become smaller beneath anyone's attention. When she reached the place where Valdemar had stopped several feet away from her days earlier, she stopped too. You asked what I wanted, she said. I did. I do not want a title because fate assigned me one. Then you will not have one. And I do not want to belong to you. A faint sadness entered his eyes, but he nodded. Then you never will. Avellini smiled softly. I want to stand beside you. Valdemar did not reach for her. So Avellini crossed the final distance herself and took his hand. The court rose around them, but she barely heard it. For 18 years, Avellini had believed freedom meant making certain no one could ever find her. Now, standing openly beside the man who had found her and still refused to own her, she understood something better. Freedom was being completely seen and still being allowed to choose whether to stay.